Okay, I think let's start.
Yeah.
So I want to welcome everyone here to this particular webinar organized by the Security and Justice Future Webinar Series, and it's hosted jointly by the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research in collaboration with the Global Risk Governance Programme, the Centre for Criminology at the Faculty of Law at UCT in Cape Town, and the Kenyan National Crime Research Centre and the University of Nairobi. Joining us today are presenters Professor Clifford Shearing, who holds positions at the University of Toronto, the University of Cape Town, the Australian National University, Griffith University, and the University of New South Wales, and Proactive Resolutions. So Clifford studies policing and its evolution. His current research is focused on the governance of 21st century harmscapes. We also have Mayssa Sultan. She's a founding board member of the Roots Community Health and currently supporting community safekeeping work with the organization. She holds a master's degree in traditional medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and a master's of public administration. Mayssa is deeply concerned with the issue of social justice and has worked to implement advocacy campaigns specifically designed at the improvement of health outcomes. Our third panelist is Khariyyah Shabazz, who serves as the Associate Director of Neighborhood Development at the Roots Community Health, where she works directly with community members, promote equity and shares best practices for supporting marginalized populations. She earned a bachelor's degree in communications from Cal State East Bay, along with a minor in sign language. As an alumna of the Young People of Color Fellowship, hosted by the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, Khariyyah is deeply committed to social justice. Her passion lies in advocating for the empowerment of underserved communities and driving initiatives that foster equity and inclusion. So today I want to welcome all of you as panelists and everybody that has joined this particular event. We are going to be talking about community-centered security governance from Cape Town to Oakland. It's the story of peace committees and what we can learn from our different experiences. And this particular webinar will, through these panelists that have joined us here today, talk to us about the story and the journey of peace committees and a restorative inspired community-centered safety initiative that reimagines community conflict resolution. I want to welcome our first panelist, Professor Clifford Shearing, with that to say a few words. And the format is we will, after Professor Clifford Shearing has introduced the topic, we will move directly over to Mayssa Sultan and thereafter to Khariyyah Shabazz. After the speakers have done their presentations, we will go over to questions. And I was very rude, Clifford. My name is Irvin and I'm an associate professor of criminology at UCT in Cape Town. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. And thank you for all of you for coming. And thanks, Irvin, for your introduction. So what I'll be doing today is initiating a discussion about peace committees, what they are, what they do, and how they developed. Following this, colleagues from Roots, a wonderful health-focused organization in Oakland, California, will share with us what Roots does and what they are doing to introduce peace committees to communities in East Oakland, California. So one of the things about East Oakland, this East Oakland initiative, is that it provides an example of South ideas traveling northwards, ideas from South Africa traveling to California. And this direction of travel with ideas from north goes against the pervading trajectory of ideas, which has traditionally been from north to south. And this continues to be the case, and it continues to be to be pervasive. I'm going to start with a couple of words about peace committees. Just a couple of words to start with, just to get us going. I'll then turn to a history of peace committees before coming back to expand on what peace committees are and what they accomplish. So, what are peace committees? Here is a very brief and succinct answer. Peace committees are a development in policing that seeks to identify, mobilize, and integrate local knowledge and capacities within communities to enhance their safety. These community resources are mobilized to not simply engage communities in the rowing of policing and the doing of policing, but more importantly, to involve communities in the steering of policing and the steering of their own security and safety. So developments that seek to do this, that is developments that seek to mobilize community resources, have come to be recognized by terms like community-centered, community-based, community-led forms of security governance. With these brief words in mind as a backdrop, let me now turn to the history of peace committees. The story of peace committees began in the early 1990s, when I received an unexpected invitation while I was at the University of Toronto from Advocate Dullah Omar, who became the first Minister of Justice in South Africa. It's South Africa's first democratically elected government led by Nelson Mandela. The invitation for me was to join Dullah at the Community Law Center that he directed at the University of the Western Cape. Once I arrived at the Community Law Center, Dullah informed me that the primary role he had envisaged for me was to explore innovative ways of thinking about policing as South Africa moved into a new democratic era. So Dullah noted that the African National Congress, who were likely at that time to be the new government, had paid relatively little attention to policing and what it would look like post-independence. So Dullah's concern was that the new Mandela government would, as a consequence of not thinking much about policing previously, be likely to simply accept colonial policing arrangements that had provided the basis for apartheid, with a focus on how these arrangements could be improved. So what he wanted to explore were innovative ideas that would aid in rethinking what policing in South Africa could and should be. In short, he wanted to explore what in today's terms we might think of as the decolonization of South African policing. So one of the ways in which I took up this challenge was to write a book with a wonderful UK scholar called Michael Brogden, entitled Policing for a New South Africa, that sought to articulate design principles for policing South Africa that would incorporate both community-centered and indigenous practices. The book was published in 1994, the year the first South African government took office. The book's focus was on how to decolonize South African policing, and it went against the grain of thinking at the time, which was to bring South Africa policing in line with established northern policing standards that were thought of as international standard, not as northern standard, but as global standards. In this line of thinking led to a reform program in which police from northern countries came to South Africa to instruct the South African police on how to improve their policing so that it was consistent with northern best practice. The objective of this reform program was to find a way of ensuring that South African policing and South African police was consistent with the best of northern policing models. In retrospect, one might think of these developments as operating to recolonize rather than decolonize South African policing. As my book writing with Brogden was taking place, an opportunity emerged that enabled me to engage in conversations and discussions about how the design principles we were developing in the book could be applied to a very concrete and pressing policing issue. The issue was the policing of the 1994 South African elections. The opportunity arose because I was appointed to an international panel that Judge Richard Goldstone, who was the chair of the Goldstone Commission on Violence, had established to explore options for policing the upcoming South African elections. The chair of this panel was Philip Hyman from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. From my perspective, this was an important opportunity for me to take the ideas that Brogden and I were developing for our book and apply them to the policing of the elections. I was aided in my work with the panel by an exploratory trip to Europe at the behest of Judge Goldstone prior to the establishment of the committee, of the panel. The purpose of this trip was to explore what other countries were doing in regard to policing of mass events and demonstrations. Given what I was doing with Michael Brogden, what I was looking for on this trip was not simply to identify international best practice, but rather to seek out examples of innovative developments that introduced local knowledge and capacity into public order policing. During this trip, one of the innovative developments that I was particularly impressed with was the way in which the events at the Rotterdam football stadium in the Netherlands were policed. It turned out that the panel used what was done in Rotterdam as a template for demonstrating, for policing demonstrations during the 1994 elections. A central challenge the Goldstone panel faced in thinking about the policing of the elections was figuring out how to police these elections given the discredited nature of the South African police, who were at the time seen as a not particularly legitimate and a hangover from apartheid. The panel used the template from Rotterdam as a way of applying our ideas. At the Rotterdam Stadium, the policing of events was managed by three authorities: the head of the soccer fan club in the area, the manager of the stadium, and the head of the local police. The panel, the Goldstone panel, drew inspiration from this and proposed the establishment of a similar policing assemblage made up of leaders from the parties who were demonstrating, leaders from the municipality in which the demonstrations would take place, and leaders from the South African police. The panel recommended policing arrangements for managing safety during the election process that gave the police a planning and backup role, but recommended that the bulk of policing should be undertaken from marshals drawn from political parties. So one of the consequences that flowed from the panel's recommendations was the training of thousands of marshals. This training process was led by Diana Yach, a South African consultant. These policing arrangements proved to be highly successful. The election process was remarkably peaceful. And with this, a new South Africa was born. A little while after this, once Dullah Omar had become the Minister of Justice, he said to me in these words, more or less, "Clifford, Why don't we figure out a way of policing poor communities that builds on the thinking of the Goldstone panel? If we can figure this out, he said, and if you provide me with a model for policing local communities with evidence to demonstrate its efficacy, the ANC government will implement the model. With financial support from the Swedish Wallenberg Institute, based at Lund University, a funder with a history of supporting the African National Congress, I got going on building a policing model that identified, mobilized, and integrated community-based knowledges and capacities. And this brings me back to the brief definition of police committees I provided at the outset. After a few years, the team I had assembled had developed a model that worked. This team included John Cartwright from UCT, who unfortunately can't attend our session today. We termed this the Zwela-Themba model after the community where we had co-designed it with local community members. Incidentally, the word Zwela-Themba means trust yourself, a very appropriate meaning. Another meaning of Zwela-Themba is place of hope, also very appropriate. The Zwela-Themba model proposed the establishment of peace committees to facilitate dispute resolution as a policing initiative for managing everyday security issues. Underlying this idea was the observation that within communities like Zwela-Themba, interpersonal harms were frequently an outcome of disputes that had become violent. These disputes typically were ones where offenders and victims oscillated over time. They weren't stable categories. Today's victim was tomorrow's offender, and so on. What the model argued was that resolving these disputes would enhance community safety. So what this Zwela-Themba model did to realize this outcome was to provide a process for resolving disputes with the aim of creating a safer tomorrow. To cut a long story short, the Mbeki government that followed the Mandela government accepted the model, and funding was provided to roll it out peace committees across the country. To undertake this rollout, an NGO was formed, and I withdrew from the process at this stage. Before Jacob Zuma put a stop to this rollout, after 2007, when he was elected president of the ANC, and then in 2009, when he became president of South Africa, politics, the NGO that had been established to run this rollout was overseeing over 40,000 disputes resolutions a year in over 250 communities. After Zuma canned the model, the principles of this model stayed alive. And these principles are polycentric policing assemblies. And they have continued to have a life in South Africa and globally. Among the global context where these design principles had a significant impact was the Patent Commission into Northern Ireland policing in the UK. Within South Africa, the focus on developing polycentric assemblages has been adopted by the government of the Western Cape. So what exactly are peace committees, and what outcomes do they accomplish? What processes enable these outcomes? Peace committees are small groups of people who facilitate gatherings that bring together local people who are thought to have the knowledge and capacity to come up with solutions to disputes. Very simple. By resolving disputes, these gatherings enable more peaceful relationships within communities, and this enables a better tomorrow. These gatherings and the plans of action they come up with for enhancing peaceful coexistence are guided by a code of good practice. This code promotes three key outcomes. First, it insists that solutions eschew violence. Second, it insists that there will be no blaming. Third, it insists that the deliberations will be focused on the future, on a better tomorrow, very different to what happens within the criminal justice system, where violence is often the outcome, where blaming is essential, and where the focus is on the past. So a very different way of thinking, a very different way of doing things. These three simple insistences have proved to be transformative. They produce deliberations and enable plans of action that promote peaceful relationships that can, and often do, transform communities. These are bottom-up transformations, not top-down transformations. The gatherings that peace committees facilitate transform communities by dealing with the issues that produce disputes, that if left to fester, tend to escalate into serious harms. Peace committees catch issues and matters when they are small, to prevent them from escalating and becoming big. To use Thomas Hobbes's phrase from his Leviathan, published in 1648, peace committees keep the peace, which is why they are called peace committees. Their job is to keep the peace within communities. Roots, as I noted at the outset, is a health-focused NGO. Their tagline is healing our communities from within. This tagline is significant as it recognizes and places front and center the utilization of local knowledge and capacity to maintain peace. Roots' approach across all of its programs is community-centered and community-led. This aligns perfectly with the approach adopted by peace committees. So that is a brief outline of peace committees. And I will now turn over to my colleagues from Roots to share with us a little more about Roots as an organization, and also what they are doing to introduce the Zwela-Themba model in a modified version into East Oakland. Over to you, Mayssa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shearing. Every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. I'm just going to share the screen. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Shearing shared with you, we are here in Oakland, California. My colleague and I will be introducing a little bit about Roots and how we got to this intervention and what we are doing to adapt it to our Oakland context. A little bit of background on Roots. We are founded in Oakland, California, just across the bay in San Francisco, if you haven't heard of Oakland itself. Our mission is to uplift those impacted by systemic inequities and poverty. We accomplish this through medical and behavioral health care, health navigation, workforce enterprises, housing, outreach, and advocacy. We were started with the understanding that whole health, as Dr. Shearing mentioned, is about the whole person, and we are truly focused on healing our community from within. And with that in mind, we add services and programs as we find that they are necessary in our community. We aim to fill gaps as we find them. So a little bit about Oakland. Oakland is a city of about 300,000 people. Our focus is on an area of East Oakland that we call the 40 by 40. This area of East Oakland contains the largest population of residents of African descent in the Bay Area. Used to be much larger with gentrification, systemic racism, and all of the other factors that are affecting East Oakland. That number has declined. And what we're doing is a concerted effort with a number of partners to bring East Oakland kind of back from the brink with an integrated set of strategies. We moved into the space of violence prevention because we are so steeped in the community. We found that gun violence, as many of you know, is a huge problem in the United States, was affecting our community, our patients, our doctors, our navigators. Every time there was an instance, it was affecting Roots very, very personally. And we wanted to kind of understand what was going on and really focus our intervention in this 40 by 40 area where there are kind of the largest health disparities that we find in all of Oakland due to, systemic racism and disinvestment that has been happening for decades in this area. So we are a very data-focused organization, and kind of when we realized that we had to intervene, we had already been thinking about a community data trust, and it made a lot of sense to start that community data trust with a pilot on gun violence and understanding through gathering data from a number of public and private partners as to what was going on or what we think was going on. So everything from the public health department to sources in the law enforcement space to figure out, what was happening. There had been very successful interventions in group and gang violence, interventions that were introduced in about 2017. But what we found in looking at the data when we found this uptick in gun violence was that there was more and more interpersonal violence that was happening. We took this to the community and kind of talked to them in a number of community gatherings that Khariyyah will talk about a little bit more to ask, how did this resonate with them? Is this what they were seeing? What other questions should we be asking of the data? And what kind of interventions would be useful? And part of that was, how do community members participate in their own safety? So the model that Dr. Shearing introduced kind of fit perfectly with what we were looking to do. We had a colleague that fortunately had worked with Drs. Shearing and Cartwright in South Africa in the 1990s with peace committees and introduced them to Roots. And we began a relationship where they began to advise us, introduce the model in more detail, how they introduced it. They trained our staff and will continue to train our staff, shared their materials, and they're acting as advisors to us as we kind of look at this model and understand how it can be adapted to our context, which is different, of course, from South Africa. It accomplishes the goal that we are setting out, which is to empower and engage community members to participate and lead solutions to the problems they experience. There's a lot of disempowerment that comes with systemic disinvestment and racism. There's a lot of economic disparities that happen. So we have kind of adapted this model to be able to empower our community members to be able to get ahead of their own problems, before, as Dr. Shearing mentioned, they escalate to violence. So peace committees for us is an intervention that is part of an integrated approach. And we are trying to come at it from a number of different angles with our community partners. And with that, I will turn it over to Khariyyah to talk a little bit more about the adaptation.
Yes. Hello, good morning, everyone. Now let's talk about a little bit how we adapted peace committees to the complexities of Oakland, California. Well, we first started off with presenting the model to community groups, leaders, and collaborators. We were able to actually take this feedback and questions back to our team, our internal team, as well as Doctors Shearing and Cartwright. This information was pivotal because it allowed us to problem solve, as well as understand what types of issues people are really having within the communities that they live, that they work, that they play. A few strategies that we use to present to community members were, first, we started internally. We started with our Violence Intervention Steering Committee, where we gathered a few folks from a few departments within Roots. We then expanded to our elder think tanks. Our elders are folks who have been working within this violence prevention work for decades. So their information, their feedback was pivotal how we moved forward. We then went to community groups that were invested within the neighborhoods that we decided to start with. These community groups included our 40 by 40s People's Advisory Council, which is a Black-led neighborhood group that consist of residents that are really here for the issues as well as the solutions. We then started hosting our quarterly safekeeping meetings with residents and these same neighborhood groups. These safekeeping meetings is a space for community members to discuss safety issues, build relationships between neighbors, as well as discuss data regarding the issues they are seeing and how it actually relates to their real life experiences, okay? We decided to focus on areas, on a particular neighborhood, two particular neighborhoods, Sabrani Park and Brookfield. These are both tight-knit communities that have been through a lot throughout these years. They've changed over so much when we're talking about demographics, when we're talking about the quality of life for folks. This community is a historical community that Roots has already invested so much time and energy and built relationships within. So this community just seems just perfect for us to actually start this pilot. Next, other ways that we adapted peace committees right here to Oakland is by administering a safekeeping survey. The safekeeping survey allowed us to identify the issues that affect our residents and understanding the values of the interventions that already exist, okay? Providing the opportunity to learn more about the issues that we can take into action in collaboration with our partners. This survey allowed us to see at a very ground level exactly what is it that people are most concerned about and what are the targets that we are going to ensure that we embed as we're moving closer to implementation. We're also going to be creating a governance, which will be an advisory council, where both of the doctors will both serve as advisors, as well as those folks who I mentioned in those elder think tanks. We're also going to be ensuring that our folks who have been doing this work for decades stay close to the work. We will also be having behavioral health professionals in attendance to our peace committee meetings. We know that this work can get personal. We know that this work can sometimes be traumatizing, and we want to make sure that we have the resources on hand to support our community members every step of the way. We are looking to expand our capacity as a team. So as we embed ourselves within these communities, we want to identify individuals who can potentially be members of Roots, who can potentially use our services for whatever they may need. So we're looking to for sure expand our capacity within our team, but as well as bringing community members so that they can understand everything that Roots has to offer. Training, here's the fun part. So training for Oakland, it looks like an opportunity for us to upscale our residents. We want to make sure that our residents are equipped with the tools that they need to handle this on their own. We do intend to provide stipends for all of our residents to attend trainings. Here at Roots, we are deeply believers in paying people for the ideas, for their time, for their energy, no matter what capacity it may be in. We're also going to be adapting role-playing situations to ones that currently fit the cultural that is relevant to the neighborhoods that we intend to serve. Some of the major issues that we've seen, just to give you a taste, is something like loud music. We're having intergenerational issues. We may have some cultural differences because of the neighborhoods, the demographics of what it consists in. So these are some of the top within the neighborhoods that we're serving. We're also going to be adding additional training modules like our mental health first aid. So we're able to handle our family members, our individuals, our neighbors who may be having some types of crisis. We're also going to be training and facilitating and note-taking to ensure, like I said before, our residents are equipped with the tools that they need to handle this all on their own. So what's next for peace committees? Well, we're just getting started. Right now, we're in our process development phase. We're working out, how do we vet issues? How are issues actually brought to the peace committee circles? We're talking about how is the communication between the both parties, how are we going to facilitate that process, okay? That's where we are right now. We're also in the phase of piloting the training for our internal Root staff, as well as a few selective PAC members. We think that is extremely important for us, our staff, to go through the training before we engage community members on a larger level. We're also looking to recruit community advisory council members, okay, to ensure that our work is aligned to the vision of the larger Oakland Peace. And we are continuing to host our safekeeping meetings and recruit interested individuals who want to participate in peace committees. We have gotten some great feedback from individuals, and people are ready to jump in and start building these relationships and really start being a part of the solution within the neighborhoods that they live, that they work, and that they play. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much to Khariyyah and to Mayssa, Sultan, for that very interesting presentation, and also to Clifford Shearing for the introductory remarks on peace committees.